December is often a time filled with holiday joy, but December of 1929 instead brought horror and tragedy to the town of Germantown, North Carolina, when Charles Lawson methodically killed his wife and 6 children on Christmas Day. Hey everyone, welcome to my channel. My name is Lauren Elizabeth. On this channel, I discuss true crime, missing people, and unsolved cases. I don't mean any disrespect in doing so, but I believe it's important to talk about these stories to keep these stories alive and find justice for victims wherever possible. If you like that type of content, please subscribe to this channel. Today we are going back over 90 years and talking about the Lawson Family massacre. It was 1929 in Germantown, a small town in North Carolina. The Lawson family was a seemingly normal and happy family. The family patriarch was Charles Davis Lawson. He was born in 1886 in Stokes County, North Carolina. He later met and fell in love with a woman named Fanny Manring, and the two were wed in 1911. 7 years later, the Lawson family, which now consisted of 4 children, would move from Stokes County to Germantown, North Carolina. After their move, Charles Lawson worked as a sharecropper on a tobacco farm, which basically was like a farm that he rented, but instead of paying a traditional rent, he would pay the landowner a portion of the crop's profits. By 1927, the Lawson family was able to save up enough money to buy their own land and were now working their very own tobacco farm. Charles Lawson and his wife Fanny had had a total of 8 children: Marie, Arthur, William, Carrie, Mabel, James, Raymond, and Mary Lou. However, William had unfortunately passed away in 1920 at the age of 6, leaving the family with a total of 7 children. By 1929, the Lawson family were considered to be well-to-do farmers. They'd owned their own tobacco farm for 2 years now, and they were doing quite well. Sometime in mid-December of that year, Charles Lawson would surprise his whole family, taking them into town and buying everyone fancy new outfits, and then having their family portrait taken. The Lawson family had never had their portrait taken before. In 1929, portraits and photos weren't something that was easily accessible, and if a family wanted to have their portrait taken, it was going to cost big bucks. So it was a very special occasion for the Lawson family to have their portrait taken, perhaps at the time seen as a holiday treat. On the morning of December 25th, 1929, the Lawson family had woken up, had their breakfast, and opened their Christmas presents. Later, Charles Lawson and his oldest son Arthur would head out into the nearby woods to do some hunting, while the younger Lawson children remained at home playing, and Fanny was in the kitchen doing some Christmas baking. After a while of hunting in the woods, Charles and Arthur had run out of ammunition, so Charles sent his son into town to get some more. But in reality, they had not run out of ammunition. After Charles sent Arthur on his errand, he headed back toward the farmhouse with his 12-gauge shotgun. He hid near the tobacco barn and waited. It wasn't too long before his daughters, Carrie and Mabel, aged 12 and 7, walked out of the farmhouse on their way toward their uncle and aunt's house. At this point, Charles shot both of his daughters. He then bludgeoned them and moved their bodies inside the tobacco barn before making his way toward the farmhouse. As Charles headed toward the house, his wife Fanny was on the porch, perhaps on her way outside after hearing the commotion by the barn. Charles shot and killed her. Inside the farmhouse, likely having heard and seen what just happened, the other children tried to get away. James and Raymond, ages 2 and 4, both ran to hide, while Marie, age 17, and the oldest Lawson child, ran to get her baby sister Mary Lou. Charles entered the house and shot Marie next as she fled, before searching the house to find the boys, James and Raymond, shooting and killing them both. Charles then went to the baby's room and bludgeoned 3-month-old Mary Lou to death. After the brutal slaying of his wife and 6 children, Charles Lawson then arranged each of their bodies, crossing their arms over their chests and propping their heads up, as if they were laid out in a casket. When Charles had finished arranging his victims, he returned to the woods, where he would eventually shoot and kill himself. In my research, I found some conflicting reports on who exactly it was that discovered the brutal scene that Charles Lawson had left behind. According to some reports, it was the 16-year-old Arthur Lawson who discovered the brutally murdered bodies of his families after he returned from his errand. According to other reports, it was Charles's brother and his wife who had stopped by to wish everyone a Merry Christmas when they discovered the brutal scene. Charles Lawson's body would be found not very long after in the woods nearby to the farmhouse. He had shot and killed himself, and according to footprints in the ground, it appeared that he had been pacing near a tree for quite some time before he took his own life. In his pocket, they found a crumpled-up note that said simply, "Blame nobody but I." News of the horrific events spread through the small town like wildfire and would end up becoming national headlines. The funeral for the family was held within the following few days, and according to news articles, over 5,000 people attended their funeral. In the aftermath of this tragedy, the big question was why. Why would Charles Lawson do this, and why would he spare the life of one of his children? By all accounts, including that of his one surviving child, Charles Lawson had been a kind and loving father and husband, and nobody could understand why he had done this. Newspapers at the time said that Charles Lawson had simply suddenly snapped. From a newspaper called The Day, a Stokes County farmer's wife and 6 children lay dead today. All the victims of a husband and father who had been kind to them until Christmas Day, when a violent fit of insanity robbed him of his reason and caused him to slay them and then shoot himself to death with a shotgun. And I do have to say that despite the very dark and horrendous subject matter, I did find the writing of that article to be a little bit humorous, particularly the line, "A violent fit of insanity robbed him of his reason." Everyone blamed this horrific event on Charles Lawson's sudden fit of insanity. However, Charles Lawson had never had a history with mental illness, and he had never had a history with any sort of violent tendencies. Charles had, however, suffered a head injury a few months earlier, which led to many people theorizing that this could have caused his sudden mental break. This theory was later discounted by doctors who performed an autopsy on Charles Lawson, saying they didn't find any injury or sign of damage to his brain. However, considering the fact they were limited to 1929's technology and knowledge, I think we today can take that with a little bit of a grain of salt. It's also widely believed that Charles Lawson had been planning this massacre, because he had taken his family out to buy fancy new clothing and go for a family portrait, which, as I said, would have been an extremely rare occurrence for the family at the time. People think he did this as a way of immortalizing himself and his family, knowing what he was going to do and knowing that they would never have another chance to take a family photo. But what had been his motive? Did Charles Lawson really just snap one day and kill his whole family without reason? Or had it been something deeper and something darker? In the many years following the brutal slaying, rumors would come out that would paint a new theory about the motive. A relative of the Lawson family, a woman who I believe was a niece to Charles and Fanny, came forward saying that she recalls when she was younger, she overheard her mother and some of her aunts discussing about how Fanny had been very concerned because she feared that Charles Lawson had been sexually abusing their oldest daughter, Marie. Another woman who had been best friends with Marie Lawson has come forward to corroborate that story, saying that Marie told her the same. Marie told her that her father had been sexually abusing her for years. This friend said that not too long before the murders occurred, Marie had told her that she was pregnant with her father's baby and that her parents both knew about this pregnancy. So based on this, people believe that the Lawson family was not the happy family they seemed to be. People believe that Charles Lawson had been abusing his daughter for years, raping her, and eventually getting her pregnant. Charles didn't want to deal with being caught or facing the consequences of what he had done, so instead he killed himself along with his wife and 6 of their children. It's also possible that his wife Fanny had told him she was going to leave him and expose him for what he had done to their daughter. Despite technically only being based on hearsay, this is the theory that seems to have the most credibility and is the theory that is widely believed to be true. From what I can tell, they never performed autopsies on Fanny or any of the 6 children. They only performed an autopsy on Charles Lawson, where they largely examined his brain. It's really frustrating to me that they didn't perform any more autopsies. I really wish we knew whether or not Marie Lawson was actually pregnant as she was rumored to be, but in 1929 they didn't have the same procedures and protocols as they would today, and this rumor of Marie being pregnant didn't come out until years later, so they unfortunately didn't think to autopsy any of the 6 Lawson children at the time. It's also often wondered and speculated about as to why Charles Lawson chose to leave one of his children alive. He had sent Arthur out on an errand so he could avoid the carnage. But why? People theorize that Charles Lawson wanted to keep his family name alive, which is why he had had their portrait taken and why he had left Arthur alive. Others think that Charles may have spared Arthur simply because he was the only family member who Charles thought might have been able to fight back or stop him. Ultimately, we don't know why Charles chose to spare Arthur's life that day. There were a couple rumors lending to other theories, including that Charles Lawson may not have been guilty at all. I've seen mention to a rumor that Charles Lawson may have been a witness to organized crime and that he and his family were wiped out as a result. However, from what I can tell, this theory isn't really substantiated, and it also seems to pose more questions than it answers, in my opinion. I've also seen another rumor mentioned that Charles may have gotten into a fight with a man at a bar a few weeks earlier, and this man was so angry that it caused him to murder Charles's whole family and stage a suicide, but once again, this theory does not seem to have any substantiating evidence to it, as well as posing more questions than it answers. If Charles had been killed either by an organized crime group or by some guy from the bar, why would they need to stage his suicide, and why would Arthur be conveniently sent out on a false errand to get bullets when we know that Charles had not been out of bullets? Both of these theories are widely believed to have just been rumors. In the aftermath of the tragedy, Charles Lawson's brother, Marion Lawson, had apparently seen opportunity after his brother's story made national headlines and attracted thousands to their funeral. Marion opened up the Lawson family farmhouse as a tourist attraction, where he'd sit by the door and collect 25 cents per ticket as thousands of people a day paraded through the home where his brother had once lived with his family and where he had brutally killed them. The crime scene was left largely the way it had been found, with blood still staining the walls and floors, and a cake that Fanny had baked that Christmas morning still sitting on the table. Apparently this cake was eventually placed into a glass display after guests started picking off some of the raisins as souvenirs. Now, as a lover of true crime myself, I can certainly understand a morbid curiosity and understand an interest in this kind of thing. However, I find it disrespectful and disturbing, to say the least, that Marion would open up the home as a tourist attraction. He charged people money to come in and gawk at the murder scene of his brother's family, the murder his brother committed, in the very same home where Marion had once sat and ate meals with his brother, his sister-in-law, and his nieces and nephews. This tourist attraction was apparently in operation for around 5 years. However, I was unfortunately unable to find any photos of the house during this time when it was operating as a tourist attraction. I was also unable to find any photos of that cake that Fanny had made that was allegedly on display for years. Apparently, after the tourist attraction closed down, a relative took this cake home and buried it. So what about Arthur Lawson? He was the only survivor of his father's attacks and only 16 years old at the time. Arthur stayed in Germantown, despite the fact that his father's heinous acts continued to be the talk of the town. From what I can tell, Arthur was in the care of one of his uncles, however, largely seemed to be on his own at this time. He would end up meeting and falling in love with a woman named Nina Bibby, and the two were later married. The young couple remained in Germantown, and the two would go on to have 4 children of their own: Nancy, Patricia, Victoria, and James. From what I can tell, it seems that after the murders, control of all the Lawson family assets went to Marion Lawson, who, as we know, would also end up turning the Lawson family farmhouse into a tourist attraction. Marion was described by family members as having been a bully, and it seems to me that Arthur and his family never saw any of that money. In 1945, 15 years after the massacre, Arthur Lawson would unfortunately pass away in a truck accident at age 31. After Arthur's death, Marion Lawson began telling Nina, Arthur's young widow, that she would be unable to raise the kids on her own, and so Marion would be taking them and splitting them up amongst himself and the other Lawson brothers to be raised. Now, to me, that sounds absolutely wild. Like, no, you cannot just take a woman's children because you think, as some random dude, that she cannot handle them. However, in 1945, things were different, and I don't know if it was technically allowed back then either, but to Nina, at least, this threat seemed like a real enough possibility, but she was not going to be letting Marion Lawson bully her into having her children taken away. So Nina packed up herself and her 4 children and moved away, eventually settling in California and never returning to Germantown. Nina would end up passing away in 1982 at the age of 64. Her children and grandchildren continue to live in California. And so, that is the story of the Lawson family murders. What do you think about this case? Do you think Charles had been abusing Marie, or do you think that he simply snapped one day and killed his family without reason? Either way, this story is a truly dark and heartbreaking one, and I would suggest finding something nice and light and cheery to watch next. But if you like true crime content and would like to see more from me in the future, please subscribe to this channel. Thanks so much for watching. Stay safe, everybody.